We also want to record this one. Last period was just a little bit off in terms of some of the timing involved, but yeah, let's go ahead and do this thing. All right, so you guys are in for one of the rare moments in all of American history. Only the fourth Senate trial of a president, in this case, the first trial of a former president. Um, really fascinating circumstances. It's the trial of the century. This here will be talked about in every single history and political science class for as long as the Republic stands. If it lasts another 232 years, they'll still be talking about this one. How can we not? I mean, it was what an event that happened on January 6th. And so what happens is we're going to show you kind of how removal works. We're going to give you basically it's kind of like a master's level class on constitutional law that was presented by the Democratic prosecutors yesterday. And so let's go ahead and talk about incitement, insurrections, the charge. You guys know very full well that that's written up and then handed to the Senate. The Senate then agrees to a trial. And after a short delay, we have that trial. So here we are. On the first day was yesterday. And my third period, talk about luck. In fact, actually, wow, let's see what's happening right now. Oh, the link I just took down was the actual live. It's just started again. But let's go ahead and we'll have to just play catch up here and do it this way. Okay, so we're going to view and present here. And basically here was the story. This is the only president ever to be impeached twice. The first impeachment, only about 47% on average through a bunch of all the different polls, believe that impeachment trial should have happened. And so it was a tight range, right? It never rose above 50%, but briefly. And so the second one is different though. Most Americans believe the Senate should convict. In other words, there's a majority. One poll, 56%, another poll, 56%. The Gallup that we're using tends to be a little bit more even-handed, if you will, just the way they ask their questions, 52 to 45. That's a pretty big gap. If you think about it for a second, that kind of reflects the election, doesn't it? So when you think about that, that's probably what that is partisanship on the part of people taking that poll. So 52 to 45%. But that doesn't matter. Polls don't matter. Polls give us a feeling as how the people are feeling about things. But remember, we elect leaders to do this job for us, right? And we then evaluate their performance, and then we, the people, decide whether we want them reelected and to give them a mandate for another 2 years in the case of the House, 4 years in the case of the president, and 6 years in the case of the Senate. So what we're doing, it's really playing out well here in Utah because we have there's a difference between our two senators and how they're voting already. And so your assignment that we're going to post after this trial is over, your job will be to simply figure out how Lee voted on the last question, which will be whether or not to convict or not, and what he said about it, what his explanation was for his vote, and then your thoughts, your opinion on what that means for you, your thoughts on it. Opinions will range all over the place, and that's okay. We should all have a difference of opinion, right? Then Romney is the other senator that you could vote for. You can get to vote for Lee. All of you can vote for Lee in 2 years or vote for his opponent. Or you could vote for Romney in 4 years or his opponent. And Romney's going to vote too. And so he'll also then explain his vote as he did last time. And you guys saw that tape, him being the only person of the president's own political party to vote against him in the first impeachment. So it'll be interesting to watch. Okay, so the first phase was a simple vote on the rules. And we're going to watch that. We're going to kind of play through that. And they split. Lee voted one way, Romney voted the other. Okay, then after they approved the rules, by the way, they approved the rules by 89 votes to the rules. So it's very bipartisan. The rules were negotiated between the Democrat leader and the Republican leader beforehand. So it was bipartisan. The rules are bipartisan. Here's how it's going to proceed. Here's how much time everybody gets. And the first question was argued yesterday. Is this trial constitutional in the first place? Can you try a former president? And a lot of Americans are probably asking the question, why do we bother? He's already out. Again, that kind of is, Americans don't know much about their own history. And they certainly don't know much about what impeachment and the trial and conviction means. So the House managers, their job was to show that in the last month of a person's presidency, they can't just do whatever they want and get away with it. And the framers of the Constitution, you'll hear that term over and over again, the framers of the Constitution were the ones that wrote it. They were around and ran the country for those first almost 20 years. And so how did they react? What did they say? What did they say at the time about this power and the power of the Senate? So they're going to have a debate. And the rules said that in this first debate, each side got, I think it was actually 4 hours each. I have it wrong there on the slide. 4 hours each to make their case. Now, you could use part of your time, then defer to the other side, and they could use part of their time, and then there'd be a rebuttal and back and forth. So you get a certain block of time. You have to stay within that block of time, and they track every minute. But when your time is up, it's up. And the other side gets their time, and time is up. So defense and prosecution, okay? All right, well, that's the first question. Is this even constitutional? And how would the framers have seen it? Okay, so let's go ahead and play you then more or less a summary of what happened so you can get kind of in the moment. Again, wow, my third period, they got to see this all live and we captured some of it. But we're just gonna go to a quick source here to give you a feel of their early presentation and what they did. Key to this is a 13-minute video that was inserted in the middle of their opening argument that was really dramatic. It will be used in college political science classes from here on in. It did a timeline of events, starting with the speeches in the morning and all of the violence that happened, and showed some footage that I've never seen before. And I thought I'd seen most of it, but oh my goodness, it was rougher and tougher than we thought. The language is just what they're calling cops, what they're saying is just really, really tough to listen to. I guess that's a polite way to say it. But this was a real mob, and they were pounding on doors where people were hiding. And they showed when the vice president and the Speaker of the House were evacuated. They showed those moments, and then what the president's comments were, former president's comments were throughout the day. And it was powerful stuff. Now, we're not going to have time to go through that. So you get a little bit of a glimpse here. Also, what you're going to get from this clip is you're going to hear the president's defense lawyers presenting their case. So you're going to hear a good clip from them in this little montage. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and play this.
Tonight, House Democrats inside the Capitol taking the same steps the rioters did 1 month ago, this time not to seize control, but to make their case for conviction against Donald Trump.
The Senate will convene as a court of impeachment.
Making history, this the second trial of Mr. Trump, the first ever against a former president.
Our case is based on cold, hard facts.
Democrats opening with a graphic 13-minute video montage reliving the horrors of January 6th.
And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Mixing in the words of Mr. Trump with clips from the crowd, supporters calling out his name.
We're outnumbered. There's a out there. If you just need control,
Rioters storming the Capitol, an officer firing a gunshot into the mob as people ransack the Senate chamber.
That's a high crime and misdemeanor. If that's not an impeachable offense, then there is no such thing.
Today, a clash over constitutionality. Democrats insisting a president must be held accountable for actions while in office, even if a trial happens after they've left.
There is no January exception to the impeachment power. That presidents can't commit grave offenses in their final days and escape any congressional response.
A presentation at times emotional from those who lived it. Congressman Jamie Raskin recalling his daughter's fear that day.
And you know what she said? She said, "Dad, I don't want to come back to the Capitol." Of all the terrible, brutal things I saw and I heard on that day, and since then, that one hit me the hardest.
Afterward, Mr. Trump's lawyers praising the Democrats' performance.
We changed what we were going to do on account that we thought that the House manager's presentation was well done.
While condemning last month's attack.
What happened on January 6th and the storming and breaching of the Capitol should be denounced in the most vigorous terms.
But arguing Mr. Trump never incited the violence and that it's unconstitutional to try to remove a president who's no longer in office.
This idea of a January amnesty is nonsense. If my colleagues on this side of the chamber actually think that President Trump committed a criminal offense, after he's out of office, you go and arrest him.
Later slamming the Democrats for what they called splicing video.
They don't need to show you movies to show you that the riot happened here. We will stipulate that it happened, and you know all about it.
And blasting the Democrats' entire case as a vendetta against Mr. Trump.
A great many Americans see this process for exactly what it is. A chance by a group of partisan politicians seeking to eliminate Donald Trump from the American political scene and seeking to disenfranchise 74 million plus American voters.
Tonight, 6 Republicans.
Okay, so I like that clip a lot because it shows you both sides and also kind of sets the stage, right? But I have a different purpose in today, and that is to actually get to constitutional law, Federalist Papers, constitutional theory at the time of the framers, and they did a wonderful job of that. And so we're gonna go ahead and go to this video right here. And it's going to be, let's see, 147. Let's see if we can back up to here. The whole proceeding started with a prayer. All Senate meetings, set days of the Senate start with a prayer. And this is actually live as it happened. I mean, this is what third period experienced live. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to let me move this over here to cover myself up from last time. But let's go ahead and play the beginning of this, because I want you also to understand the process, that we have a rule of law and we have rules within the Senate. Those rules have got to be voted on and approved. And during this trial, you follow the rules. It's the rule of law. You just don't, for example, well, you're going to see the Sergeant of Arms warn everybody in the gallery and every senator that this is a trial. And so during the trial, you have to remain silent and just listen to the evidence. And if you start shouting out or heckling or anything like that, you will be removed and arrested. And it's a crime because it's a court in the Senate, and you don't disturb the proceedings of a court. So yeah, and that's interesting. And then you're going to see the pledge. They do the prayer and the pledge, and then they call the meeting to order, and then they take up the first order of business, which is whether or not they should even move forward with this. And so let's go ahead and start this video at that point, and where the chaplain, the Senate chaplain, delivers the morning prayer.
Trial. Lord, permit the words of the New England poet James Russell Lowell to provide our Senate jurors with just one perspective. Lowell wrote, "Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide. In the strife of truth with falsehood for the good or evil side. Mighty God, could it really be that simple? Could it really be just truth striving against falsehood and good striving against evil? powerful Redeemer, have mercy on our beloved land. We pray in your magnificent name. Amen.
All right. Wow. What you guys just witnessed, talk about timing, was the opening invocation or opening prayer to the impeachment trial. And that was the Senate chaplain that did that. Now, from here on in, it's probably going to be just a lot of procedures and things, which, you know, aren't very interesting. But wow.
Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, here we go. Let's do the pledge, right? With the Senate, right? Those that want to join me, go ahead. Oh, too late. Oh my goodness, you guys are witnessing history right now. So it has officially started with that pledge and with the opening prayer to guide the Senate through this now impeachment trial. And you heard the gavel.
Morning business is closed, and the Senate will convene as a court of impeachment. I ask senators to be seated.
Okay, this is the President pro tempore of the Senate who's managing the proceedings. And notice it's all, you know, according to the rules of the Senate. There's a very strict protocol, and you're going to hear him follow that strict protocol, right? It's Robert's Rules of Order, basically.
If there's no objection, the journal of proceedings of the trial are approved to date. And ask the Sergeant at Arms to make the proclamation.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All persons are commanded to keep silence on pain of imprisonment while the Senate of the United States is sitting for the trial of the article of impeachment exhibited by the House of Representatives against Donald John Trump, former President of the United States.
My guess is those are the defense attorneys for the former president.
I note the presence in the Senate chamber, the managers on the part of the House Representatives and counsel for the former President of the United States.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Mr. President, in a moment, I will call up a resolution to govern the structure, the second impeachment trial of Donald John Trump. It's been agreed to by the House managers, the former president's counsel, and is co-sponsored by the Republican leader. It is bipartisan. It's our solemn constitutional duty to conduct a fair and honest impeachment trial of the charges against former President Trump, the gravest charges ever brought against a president of the United States in American history. This resolution provides for a fair trial, and I urge the Senate to adopt it. Mr. President, I send a resolution to the desk on my behalf and that of the Republican leader for the organizing of the next phases of this trial.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 47 to provide for related procedures concerning the article of impeachment against Donald John Trump, former President of the United States.
The question occurs on the adoption of the resolution.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. There is a sufficient second. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Barrasso.
Okay.
Mr. Barrasso, aye.
So they have to vote on this resolution. So everything has to be voted on, whether or not they agree to the rules. So the first vote was on the rules. I think we can jump forward and maybe we can get Mr. Lee in here from Utah. Let's see if we hit the right spot.
Aye. Mr. Portman.
PQ, let's do R. Let's do Romney.
Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed, aye. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, Aye. Mr. Romney? Mr. Romney? Aye. Ms. Rose?
Okay, so I means yes. Lee voted no. And so that right there, you know, is really kind of important to know for your opinion essay that you'll do at the end of this trial. And so that should give you, you know, a little information on both sides. Now let's go ahead and see, they're going to now count those votes, and they pass the first phase of this to approve the rules. So they're not going to have a trial without the rule of law, and these are the rules that are going to govern the trial. You know, still need to register their vote. Very bipartisan as things go, but obviously there were some high-profile Republicans like Holly and Lee and Paul and Tupperville that voted no. Again, the Senate, you know, they all think differently. They all have differences of opinion, and they're able to express it. So that's a pretty cool thing. So it looks like they're making sure they're double checking and counting the votes. They have to certify all these. They have to make sure that, you know, everybody had a chance to vote. And if they got the vote wrong in the official record, this all goes into the congressional record and stored forever, by the way, for historians at the Smithsonian, not Smithsonian, but the Library of Congress. So you guys are really lucky to watch it. Now, it's very deliberative. It's very Robert's Rules of Order. It's very conducted in a very civil way. Motions run high. So if you have rules of discussion and debate, here we go.
This vote, the yeas are 89, the nays are 11. The resolution is agreed to.
Okay, so 11
Pursuant
voted
to
against.
the provisions of Senate Resolution
89,
47,
11.
there should now be 4 hours of argument by the parties equally divided on the question of whether Donald John Trump is subject to the jurisdiction of a court of impeachment for acts committed while President of the United States, notwithstanding the expiration of his term in that office. Mr. Manager Raskin, are you a proponent or opponent of this question? Mr. Castor, are you a proponent or opponent of this question? Thank you. Mr. Manager Raskin, your party may proceed first. We'll be able to reserve rebuttal time if you wish.
Okay, so they're going to debate whether this is even constitutional, and it's going to be 4 hours equally divided, so 2 hours per side. Obviously, we won't be in class for that, but let's
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
This is
Distinguished members of the Senate. Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Raskin. It's my honor to represent the people of Maryland's 8th Congressional District in the House, and also to serve as the lead House manager. And Mr. President, we will indeed reserve time for rebuttal. Thank you. Because I've been a professor of constitutional law for 3 decades, I know there are a lot of people who are dreading endless lectures about the Federalist Papers here. Please breathe easy, okay? I remember well W.H. Auden's line that a professor is someone who speaks while other people are sleeping. You will not be hearing extended lectures from me.
Love it.
Because our case is based on cold, hard facts. It's all about the facts. President Trump has sent his lawyers here today to try to stop the Senate from hearing the facts of this case. They want to call the trial over before any evidence is even introduced. Their argument is that if you commit an impeachable offense in your last few weeks in office, you do it with constitutional impunity. You get away with it. In other words, conduct that would be a high crime and misdemeanor in your first year as president, and your second year as president, and your third year as president, and for the vast majority of your fourth year as president, you can suddenly do in your last few weeks in office without facing any constitutional accountability at all.
Okay, so this is one of the questions a lot of people have. I mean, you know, is it even worth doing, you know? And they're making the case that, yeah, it's absolutely essential. There's no January exception. You can be a good person all the way through and do everything right. And then in your last month, try to hang on to power, try to cling on, break all the rules and get away with it. And so that's their argument. There's no January exception, okay? Whereas you heard the counter argument in that he's already out of office. Why are we bothering? And so those are two sides that you can definitely discuss in your paper. But let's hear this case about a January exception. Do we just let a president do whatever they want in their last few weeks?
This would create a brand new January exception to the Constitution of the United States of America. A January exception. And everyone can see immediately why this is so dangerous. It's an invitation to the president to take his best shot at anything he may want to do on his way out the door, including using violent means to lock that door, to hang on to the Oval Office at all costs, and to block the peaceful transfer of power. In other words, the January exception is an invitation to our founders' worst nightmare. And if we buy this radical argument that President Trump's lawyers advance, we risk allowing January 6th to become our future. And what will that mean for America? Think about it. What will the January exception mean to future generations if you grant it? I'll show you.
We will stop the steal. Today, I will lay out just some of the evidence proving that we won this election, and we won it by a landslide. This was not a close election. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
Okay, so what happens then is they show this dramatic 13-minute video we don't have time for, but it is dramatic, and it will, like I say, be played for 150 years, 200 years, because it was so effective. Because here's the reason: it provided a timeline of what was said and the actions of the mob and what happened, during those hours in startling detail. And it was just very effective. You guys remember this scene, right? Of the officer leading them away from the Senate, leading them away from Mike Pence. You guys remember that moment? And I'm just going to jump ahead though. And they show here are the House and Senate were in session. And here is the moment when the Secret Service just grabbed Nancy Pelosi and took her out. They also showed where Mike Pence was taken out. And so everything was normal in there until all of a sudden this noise outside, people are pounding on the doors. It's very powerful stuff that I wish we had more time for, but we don't. So we're just going to jump ahead. And then let's see. They show the tweets that were sent out during the time. They show some of the chanting. And it was rougher than I thought. This moment particularly where they're pushing, it looked like an old-fashioned Spartan versus Athenian kind of phalanx kind of thing. It was wild, and the words that were used, was just harsh stuff. And then the president concluding with this, and I'm going to play this bit because this is part of his defense, is that he came out and said, well, okay, now it's time to go home. Let's see if I can get that right.
Home in peace.
Misdemeanor.
Okay, so that was the video, and they showed the tweets and everything else. Wow, it was a stunner. And that's why the defense attorneys decided to change their strategy, because it was so effective. Let's go ahead now and hit play. By the way, this is the part that's most important for me, is that you hear the framers of the Constitution, the people that wrote it in their own time, looking at what they intended at this particular moment, if anything like this should ever happen. So for me as a political science professor, this is the part that matters most that you hear. Most Americans will never take the time to listen to this, and that's why they're confused about all these, terms and everything else. But you're going to hear the arguments right. You're going to hear Federalist Papers brought out. You're going to have Hamilton, Jefferson, all that. So you're going to hear what they had to say at the time.
Senators, the president was impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives on January 13th for doing that. You ask what a high crime and misdemeanor is under our Constitution? That's a high crime and misdemeanor. If that's not an impeachable offense, then there is no such thing. If the president's arguments for a January exception are upheld, then even if everyone agrees that he's culpable for these events, even if the evidence proves, as we think it definitively does, that the president incited a violent insurrection on the day Congress met to finalize the presidential election, he would have you believe there is absolutely nothing the Senate can do about it. No trial, no facts. He wants you to decide that the Senate is powerless at that point. That can't be right. The transition of power is always the most dangerous moment for democracies. Every historian will tell you that. We just saw it in the most astonishing way. We lived through it. And you know what? The framers of our Constitution knew it. That's why they created a Constitution with an oath written into it that binds the president from his very first day in office until his very last day in office and every day in between. Under that Constitution and under that oath, the president of the United States is forbidden to commit high crimes and misdemeanors against the people at any point that he's in office. Indeed, that's one specific reason the impeachment, conviction, and disqualification powers exist, to protect us against presidents who try to overrun the power of the people in their elections and replace the rule of law with the rule of mobs. These powers must apply even if the president commits his offenses in his final weeks in office. In fact, that's precisely when we need them the most, because that's when elections get attacked. Everything that we know about the language of the Constitution, the framers' original understanding and intent, prior Senate practice, and common sense confirms this rule. Let's start with the text of the Constitution, which in Article 1, Section 2 gives the House the sole power of impeachment when the president commits high crimes and misdemeanors. We exercised that power on January 13th. The president, it is undisputed, committed his offense while he was president. And it is undisputed that we impeached him while he was president. There can be no doubt that this is a valid and legitimate impeachment. And there can be no doubt that the Senate has the power to try this impeachment. We know this because Article 1, Section 3 gives the Senate the sole power to try all impeachments. The Senate has the power, the sole power, to try all impeachments. All means all, and there are no exceptions to the rule. Because the Senate has jurisdiction to try all impeachments, it most certainly has jurisdiction to try this one. It's really that simple. The vast majority of constitutional scholars who studied the question and weighed in on the proposition being advanced by the president, this January exception, heretofore unknown, agree with us. And that includes the nation's most prominent conservative legal scholars, including former 10th Circuit Judge Michael McConnell, the co-founder of the Federalist Society, Stephen Calabresi, Ronald Reagan Solicitor General Charles Freed, luminary Washington lawyer Charles Cooper, among hundreds of other constitutional lawyers and professors. I commend the people I named, their recent writings to you in the newspapers over the last several days. And all of the key precedents, along with detailed explanation of the constitutional history and textual analysis, appear in the trial brief we filed last week and the reply brief that we filed very early this morning. I'll spare you a replay, but I want to highlight a few key points from constitutional history that strike me as compelling in foreclosing President Trump's argument that there's a secret January exception hidden away in the Constitution. The first point comes from English history, which matters because, as Hamilton wrote, England provided the model from which the idea of this institution has been borrowed. And it would have been immediately obvious to anyone familiar with that history that former officials could be held accountable for their abuses while in office. Every single impeachment of a government official that occurred during the framers' lifetime concerned a former official. A former official. Indeed, the most famous of these impeachments occurred while the framers gathered in Philadelphia to write the Constitution. It was the impeachment of Warren Hastings, the former Governor General of the British colony of Bengal, and a corrupt guy. The framers knew all about it, and they strongly supported the impeachment. In fact, the Hastings case was invoked by name at the convention. It was the only specific impeachment case that they discussed at the convention. It played a key role in their adoption of the high crimes and misdemeanor standard. And even though everyone there surely knew that Hastings had left office 2 years before his impeachment trial began, not a single framer, not one, raised a concern when Virginian George Mason held up the Hastings impeachment as a model for us in the writing of our Constitution. The early state constitutions supported the idea too. Every single state constitution in the 1780s either specifically said that former officials could be impeached or were entirely consistent with the idea. In contrast, not a single state constitution prohibited trials of former officials. As a result, there was an overwhelming presumption in favor of allowing legislatures to hold former officials accountable in this way. Any departure from that norm would have been a big deal, and yet there's no sign anywhere that that ever happened. Some states, including Delaware, even confined impeachment only to officials who had already left office. This confirms that removal was never seen as the exclusive purpose of impeachment in America. The goal was always about accountability, protecting society, and deterring official corruption. Delaware matters for another reason. Writing about impeachment in the Federalist Papers, Hamilton explained that the president of America would stand upon no better ground than a governor of New York and upon worse ground than the governors of Maryland and Delaware. He thus emphasized that the president is even more accountable than officials in Delaware, whereas I noted the Constitution clearly allowed impeachment of former officials. And nobody involved in the convention ever said that the framers meant to reject this widely accepted, deeply rooted understanding of the word impeachment when they wrote it into our Constitution. The convention debates instead confirm this interpretation. There, while discussing impeachment, the framers repeatedly returned to the threat of presidential corruption aimed directly at elections, the heart of self-government. Almost perfectly anticipating President Trump, William Davey of North Carolina explained impeachment was for a president who spared, quote, no effort or means whatever to get himself reelected. Hamilton in Federalist 1 said the greatest danger to republics and the liberties of the people comes from political opportunists who begin as demagogues and end as tyrants, and the people who are encouraged to follow them. President Trump may not know a lot about the framers, but they certainly knew a lot about him. Given the framers' intense focus on danger to elections and the peaceful transfer of power, it is inconceivable that they designed impeachment to be a dead letter in the president's final days in office, when opportunities to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power would be most tempting and most dangerous, as we just saw. Thus, as a matter of history and original understanding, there is no merit to President Trump's claim that he can incite an insurrection and then insist weeks later that the Senate lacks the power to even hear evidence at a trial, to even hold a trial. The true rule was stated by former President John Quincy Adams when he categorically declared, "I hold myself, so long as I have the breath of life in my body, amenable to impeachment by the House for everything I did during the time I held any public office." When he comes up in a minute, my colleague, Mr. Neguse of Colorado, will further pursue the relevant Senate precedents and explain why this body's practice has been supported by the text of the Constitution. And Mr. Cicilline of Rhode Island will then respond to the fallacies presented by the President's counsel. And after these gentlemen speak, I will return to discuss the fundamental importance of the Senate rejecting President Trump's argument for the preservation of democratic self-government and the rule of law in the United States of America.
Okay, so wow, talk about, you guys live the moment. This is going to be written about, talked about for as long as the Republic lasts, another 250 years, let's hope. So you were there. You were kind of the privileged class to see this live. Let's listen to this first speaker here.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, my name is Joe Neguse, and I represent Colorado's 2nd Congressional District in the United States Congress. Like many of you, I'm an attorney. I practiced law before I came to Congress, tried a lot of different cases, some more unique than others. Certainly never a case as important as this one, nor a case with such a heavy and weighty constitutional question for you all to decide. Thankfully, as lead manager Raskin so thoroughly explained, the framers have answered that question for you, for us. And you don't need to be a constitutional scholar to know that the argument President Trump asks you to adopt is not just wrong, it's dangerous. And you don't have to take my word for it. This body, the world's greatest deliberative body, the United States Senate, has reached that same conclusion in one form or another over the past 200 years in multiple occasions that we'll go through. Over 150 constitutional scholars, experts, judges, conservative, liberal, you name it, they overwhelmingly have reached the same conclusion that, of course, you can try, convict, and disqualify a former president. And that makes sense because the text of the Constitution makes clear there is no January exception to the impeachment power. That presidents can't commit grave offenses in their final days and escape any congressional response. That's not how our Constitution works. Let's start with the precedent, with what has happened in this very chamber. I'd like to focus on just 2 cases. I'll go through them quickly. One of them is the nation's very first impeachment case, which actually was of a former official. In 1797, about a decade after our country had ratified our Constitution, there was a senator from Tennessee by the name of William Blount, who was caught conspiring with the British to try to sell Florida and Louisiana. Ultimately, President Adams caught him. He turned over the evidence to Congress. 4 days later, the House of Representatives impeached him. A day after that, this body, the United States Senate, expelled him from office. So he was very much a former official. Despite that, the House went forward with its impeachment proceeding in order to disqualify him from ever again holding federal office. And so the Senate proceeded with the trial with none other than Thomas Jefferson presiding. Now, Blount argued that the Senate couldn't proceed because he had already been expelled. But here's the interesting thing. He expressly disavowed any claim that former officials can't ever be impeached. I mean, unlike President Trump, he was very clear that he respected and understood that he could not even try to argue that ridiculous position. Even impeached Senator Blunt recognized the inherent absurdity of that view. Here's what he said. I certainly never shall contend that an officer may first commit an offense and afterwards avoid by resigning his office. That's the point. And there was no doubt because the founders were around to confirm that that was their intent and the obvious meaning of what is in the Constitution. Fast forward 80 years later, arguably the most important precedent that this body has to consider. The trial of former Secretary of War, William Belknap. I'm not going to go into all the details, but just in short, in 1876, the House discovered that he was involved in a massive kickback scheme. Hours before the House committee that discovered this conduct released its report documenting the scheme, Belknap literally rushed to the White House to resign, tender his resignation to President Ulysses Grant, to avoid any further inquiry into his misconduct, and of course, to avoid being disqualified from holding federal office in the future. Well, later that day, aware of the resignation, what did the House do? The House moved forward and unanimously impeached him, making clear its power to impeach a former official. And when his case reached the Senate, this body, Belknap made the exact same argument that President Trump is making today. That you all lack jurisdiction, any power to try him because he's a former official. Now, many senators at that time, when they heard that argument, literally they were sitting in the same chairs you all are sitting in today. They were outraged by that argument. Outraged. You can read their comments in the record. They knew it was a dangerous argument with dangerous implications. It would literally mean that a president could betray their country, leave office, and avoid impeachment and disqualification entirely. And that's why, in the end, the United States Senate decisively voted that the Constitution required them to proceed with the trial. The Belknap case is clear precedent that the Senate must proceed with this trial since it rejected pretrial dismissal, affirmed its jurisdiction, and moved to a full consideration of the merits. Now, Belknap...
And we're about running out of time, so let me just kind of...
Yeah, let me go ahead and take over here now from the video. And what's important about this for us, for the political science class, is the legal arguments that are made based upon precedent. You guys remember very clearly, we talked about how Hammurabi's Code was a series of decisions that were the precedent that were passed down through generations. This is how our Supreme Court works too. Once a decision is made, it's stare decisis. They stay with that decision. So basically what happened in the past, people who had been already left office, in one case 2 years, were still tried in the Senate and convicted in that one case, the Belknap case. So this is kind of important because we are the rule of law, and we do believe that we look back and see how they handled things, the people that wrote the Constitution, how did they handle things, and apply it to today. And not just make up new rules today just because we're on one political side or the other. Now it's the job of the president's defense attorneys to try to counter that argument. And you did hear some of that argument at the top. Listen, what happens next is this. Okay, let me go ahead and click out of here. Is that there was then a vote on whether or not it was constitutional or not to move forward. Is this a legal proceeding under the Constitution? And at this particular moment, there was another vote. And in this time, 6 members of the Republican Party joined the Democrats and said yes. And so that vote was 56 for that. Yes, it's constitutional. Absolutely, we can continue. And so by that decision, by that vote, it became constitutional. That's been decided. And so on that vote of constitutionality, I'll move this out of the way here. So we have conflicting little things there. But on this argument, Lee voted no. He said it wasn't constitutional, and Romney said yes. Now, it'll be very interesting to get their comments on that. And that's what you need to do. Obviously, there was a difference of opinion here. We want to hear that difference of opinion. And so we'll listen to that. And in the Supreme Court, they have what they call a majority opinion. So say 5 justices vote for one side. That's the majority opinion. That's the ruling. That's what you go with. But the other jurists in the Supreme Court can write a minority opinion for future reference to give why they maybe voted against it. So most of our decisions in the Supreme Court are 5-4. Here, it's the same thing, 56, versus 44. We should hear the rationale as to why they voted for or against if we're going to be impartial jurors ourselves here. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Today, right now, at this moment, if I can go to, let's see if I can go to the video if there's time. Let me escape out of here and let's go to YouTube. We're almost out of time. Yeah, we're not going to make it. Basically, if you go to YouTube and you can go to I would go to C-SPAN. Here it is. Here's the trial. Here it's happening live.
You're certified.
You guys aren't sharing the screen. So I couldn't show that to you.
And for those who question that it was,
we'll end right